Today, we're going to talk about and we're going to read a few scripts. So, let's take a walk to the Geek Shop.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Geek Shop. I'm Chetan, and with me is Chris.
Hello, hello.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. So, Chris, what are we talking about today?
So today I'm giving you a bit of a challenge because we keep talking about scripts, and it's sort of a weird issue when it comes to us because some people use scripts, some people don't. Some people have outlines, some people have detailed scripts, and so for today's episode, I did something a little special. I sort of found some scripts online, some real scripts for real comic books. And yes, we've got an example being held up. And I've just taken. It's about the first page of each comic for these scripts. But and you'll see it. And if you'll be able to download it below. What you'll notice is there are no titles, and there are a bunch of blank spots in those scripts. And the reason those exist is because those will give what the script is for away. And so my partner there. He has a copy exactly the same as you will be downloading below, but it does not say what it is. And so he's going to scan them right now in front of us. Okay. And as soon as possible, I believe these are all comic books you may even own. So I went with stuff I know you like. And so the idea is he's going to go through them. So he's going through the first one right now. And I'm going to see if you can tell what comic book the first one is. It's a bit of a challenge, but I think it's I think it's possible. And this is I'll give you a clue on this one. It's not the first issue of that comic book. So see if we can do. And maybe if this gets really slow for us, and it's we'll just speed this up until he gets through part of it or guesses it. Any ideas? I think it's just the first. It's just the one that says number 1 on it. So that's
number
it.
one.
So it's just the first page.
It seems like something like Sherlock Holmes or something.
That's a good guess.
No, I'm trying to think. I don't think it's From Hell, Alan Moore.
It's not. It's definitely not Alan Moore. No.
Okay, because it would be more detailed. That's what I assume.
Yeah. Your Sherlock Holmes thing. That's a curious thing to say, and I think it might lead you. It's an actual comic. You want me to tell you? You want me to give you a clue and tell you the publisher?
Sure.
DC. Sort of DC though.
Hellblazer?
Very good.
I didn't even think about that.
Hellblazer issue 13, and it's the first page.
And that's by Jamie Delano, if I remember.
No, Tim Seeley.
Oh, the new series. Sorry,
Yep.
New series. Okay. I'm the old school fan. Jamie Delano's.
Okay.
I read all 100 and some issues, so I'm a huge fan of Hellblazer. I haven't, and I'll be honest, I haven't read the new stuff because we could get into a whole conversation episode about all of that. But no,
Yep.
okay. You know what? The London part got. I didn't even think about John Constantine. I was thinking more like a Sherlock Holmes type of a thing.
Yeah, I think the DC. When I told you what comic book, I think that gave it away.
Yes, and
Okay. So
Tom Seeley's script writing's interesting. Also, he's okay.
It's really interesting stuff. Yeah. It's really interesting detail, but it's very sort of organized, but also sort of flows nicely. It's actually a pretty good script. I was actually quite surprised by it.
Now, what Chris and I were talking about in previous episode is every creator who's writing their stories have their own version of a script or a plot. Now, is there a right way or wrong way of doing it? No. So
This proves it. These are all like big titles, and every one of these is just totally different than the next. So
what we should do is... Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, do you want to try number 2, or do you want to
Sure, I'll try number two. What I was thinking was for the people viewing this, maybe do a screenshot of the script also, so that way before I do anything, they could have a read also. I
Yeah,
mean, I
or
know
they can download it.
they could download
we can
it
put a
also, but
download.
do a screenshot also, just so that they could see the script how it's written quickly. Okay, let's do
Sure.
script 2.
Yep. So this is an interesting one. I know you read this. I know you've talked about this on this podcast before, so I know for a fact that you read this. But it's a little bit longer. It's like it's almost 3 pages.
Oh, this
of
is
script, and I think it's-
Sandman.
No, not Sandman. I think nowadays with the controversy, I don't think I'd put Sandman on there, but
You got me on this one. I'm thinking, it's not Books of Magic, is it?
no, it's not. It's not. It's something you definitely read, and it's Sandman. Yeah, you're in the right realm of comic books for sure, right publisher for sure.
At Harmony House, neat identifying sign on the glass tells us this is Harmony House. That sounds familiar, and you got me on this one.
Invisibles.
Really?
Yep, Grant Morrison. That's page 1 of issue 1.
Wow. Did not think of Grant Morrison on this one. Now, okay. This is how he writes his scripts. Wow.
Yep.
Okay, so again, people watching this, I didn't know Morrison. I've never looked at Grant Morrison's scripts. This is interesting way he writes it. He writes it more in a plot form, and it's a plot form, but it's also a script form.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So compared to him and Tom Seeley, that's a difference in script writing. So this is Tom Seeley's script, if you look at it quickly, and this is Morrison's.
Yep.
Wow.
Morrison writes more like a novel than anything
Yeah,
else.
that's
which is
it,
kind of
yes.
fascinating.
So that's
Yeah, I
that's a interesting. I was reading it and I'm going, okay, this sounds familiar, and I was thinking, no, I've read Neil Gaiman's script before, so I kind of seen his, but I was thinking that I don't know, something about it, but you threw me off twice now.
But you got close. I'll say you got some close. So that's you're doing well. So now we're on to this is number 3 on the list. It's got a big number 3 above it. I think you'll
Yes.
guess this one almost immediately, probably. And well, I'll talk about it afterwards, but go for it. It's in all caps, and I think that's specifically for a reason.
This is Alan Moore.
This is definitely Alan Moore.
Yeah, because I've seen his script before, and he writes this. Okay, I'm not going to read through all of it, but
No.
I've read his scripts before.
Yep.
And I've read the Watchmen scripts, and I read one of his other ones, and he puts in like even this details about since I'm not entirely sure on how these graphic novels are set out, I might suggest if there are any end papers of any kind that might be designed so the flow to flow into and out of the first and last panels of the story.
Okay, and the other
Yeah.
clue I'll tell you about this, for all the other versions, I gave you the first page of the comic book. This is the first panel.
Yes, same thing with Watchmen. I remember Watchmen looking at it and going, reading the script, and I had this Watchmen hardcover from the 80s or 90s, and I had printed the script to the first full issue. Panel 1 had same thing as this.
Any idea? So you guess it's a popular Alan Moore
sorry.
comic. It's a popular Alan Moore comic. Like I'll give you that. It's very popular. It's definitely nothing obscure, and I would say it's probably one of the most well-read Alan Moore comic books. And it's not Watchmen, so I'll give you that. I didn't do Watchmen because they actually had Watchmen available, but I didn't do it because I think you've already read that, so I thought I'd give you this one. I'm trying to think if there's. You might if you skip closer to the end, you might get a better idea of what comic book it is.
I'm thinking just from the description, from hell.
That's a good guess, but not from hell. It's okay. I'll give you, and this will give it to you. It's from a DC comic book, and it's not like an alternative DC comic book.
Swamp Thing?
No, that's another amazing guess. Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah, sure.
Killing Joke.
Oh, the puddles. Yes, at the end, the puddles of water and all that.
Yep.
Yes. And the beginning, yes, when Batman comes to visit in the puddles of water.
Yep.
Yes. Oh, wow.
That's a
Wow.
I mean, and this goes back to your example. I'm glad you actually said that earlier. You were saying how everybody writes scripts differently. I mean, this is one of the most well-known comic book writers in the world. And this is one of the most things, and it's totally different than the first two we looked at by like.
And there was only 4 pages, right, of scripts?
Yeah, there's a fourth one now too. Right, just below it.
Oh, fourth one? Oh, yes, right here. Okay. But no, that's interesting with the Alan Moore script. Alan Moore, I remember even in one of the scripts, I don't know which one was it. It wasn't Watchmen. It was one of his other books. And he's talking to the artist as he's in the middle of the script.
Yeah.
You know, telling the artist, you know, if you're in the mood of this and that or whatever, you know, check this out, check that out. And it's like, it'd be fun to read more of his scripts, just to sit down and see. I mean, he's proven how much of a genius he is.
And it's funny because I found this script online, but the person who offered it only offered the first 10 pages of the comic book because I just think that was probably a novel in itself.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
So
yes.
You want to try the last one?
Now, before we get into it, here's a side note on Alan Moore's script and stuff like that. Did you ever? This is a geek topic now.
Oh, good.
You brought up the water puddle and the scene and stuff. Did you read the theory Grant Morrison gave about a Killing Joke?
I don't think I have. No.
The ending of Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Grant Morrison thinks Batman killed the Joker.
I could see that.
Because he's laughing, then at the end he's not laughing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you think Alan Moore intended that or not? Alan Moore's not saying anything, so.
Of course not.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting theory.
There's I read the article. I think there's a video also where Grant Morrison goes into detail talking about it. It's like, hate to say it's like us. Grant Morrison's a big geek and he's, looking into the book and, like the genius of Alan Moore and just, I think thinking way into the comic book than he should. And that's what we do.
That's what we do too. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, script number 4. Let's see.
4. This is a lot more of what I would suspect comic books this is like comic book script writing 101 as opposed to like something artsy and something interesting. So I don't know if you've read this comic, but I know you like this character.
Well, thinking about a pilot and mentioning Edwards, I'm thinking it's Green Lantern or Captain Marvel.
You got Green Lantern. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Because those are only 2 pilots I know from comics. And when it mentions the Edwards, I'm assuming it's Edwards Air Force Base.
Yes.
I've read my Green Lanterns, so I know.
Exactly.
I know.
That's why for the sample, I wanted to do like a really sort of in-house book script. Like this is.
So, who wrote this script?
It's Jeff Johns.
The Green Lantern one. Jeff Johns, okay. And I have all of his Green Lantern collections.
This is Green Lantern 1, page 1.
Okay, I have all of his Green Lantern trades. So I know my Jeff John Green Lanterns, but
that is why I put this here because I was like, he's gonna get this one.
But that's interesting. So Jeff Johns writes more of a traditional, but even he writes a traditional way of scripting.
I feel like maybe because it's DC, I feel like maybe there's guidelines for scripts for characters like Green Lantern. Like I
wonder on that.
Yeah, I feel like that's possible, and I feel like that's why you'll never see Alan Moore writing a Green Lantern because they'll probably say, oh well, if you do this issue of Green Lantern, this is how you do it, and he'll be like, well, I guess I won't be doing that.
Now, here's a one thing I read. This is going back many moons ago. Keith Giffen, I think when he plots out stories for other writers, other artists, I think he does it more in a sketch form.
I think so. I've heard. Well, I mean, he's an artist too. I mean,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
he's drawn enough of his own
So-
stuff. So yeah, that makes sense.
and I know a lot of times he does the plotting, and he has writers like J.M. DeMatteis and other writers doing the script. But the plot, I do remember him. I want to. Okay, I'll check into it and put a link at the with this video for that.
Yeah. Okay.
And he does it that way. And I wonder how other like writers do it. Like for example, like John Byrne, he's an artist,
Yeah.
he's a writer, and he writes his own stories, but he also writes stories for other people also.
Yeah, I specifically picked people who were writers for the scripts as well.
Yes,
like,
that's it.
Like because I
Yes.
wanted to sort of specifically highlight the fact that there are just so many different types of scripts, and so and specifically writers, because I think once you get somebody who's more an artist, I think you are dealing more with visuals and less with just pure written word. So
But it's interesting because even in our book TikTok Tom, Massimo, who's a writer artist on the book, he sent me one of his scripts or one of his stories, and away from TikTok Tom, and he puts in full detail, like description, everything,
Yep.
and which is kind of surprising because because he's a writer artist, I would think he'd put half the detail in because it's all in here.
yeah, I put a lot of detail into my scripts too. Like
Do you?
I can, yeah. I'll have times. Like I have panels and stuff and areas. A lot of it has to do with the fact that sometimes when I'm writing it, I just don't have, something specific in mind, but I want to make sure that I remember it exactly right. And so the details. So I'll put falls down, splashing, water going everywhere, things like that. Like it may not be as detailed as this because I'm not giving this to a second person or like a third person outside. But I make sure that there's enough reminders for me that I'm going to know exactly what I'm thinking about right then, as opposed to guy walks out of frame. I'll be like, guy walks out of frame, close his door, background this and clear background and stuff like that. So I'll do that if I think it's important to the story. I will definitely do that. So I'm probably.
Now I know reading. Sorry.
I was going to say I'm probably closer to like a Grant Morrison and even Tim Seeley level, where it's a little bit novelish.
Oh wow! Wow.
So and a little.
I remember reading years ago, old school Marvel way was, this is again, I don't know how much, we could go into the debate about what Stanley wrote and what he didn't, but that's for other people to talk about, not us.
Yeah.
But I remember reading stories where, artists would go into, the office, and they would quickly talk about, hey, Spider-Man beats up Doc Ock and Aunt May is kidnapped. And that's it.
Yeah.
And the artist goes home and plots it out.
You'll notice there's no Marvel scripts in this. I have a feeling that's because there's a lot of people doing Marvel method at Marvel, and I think there just isn't this. There isn't a script really to download. There's a conversation between two people while creating a comic book, and so that doesn't exist. So these are all DC related things because
Yeah, you're right. I noticed that.
like it's either that or Marvel keeps their scripts very tightly locked up and doesn't allow the artists, so they're just not available on the internet. But I think it's also possible that there just really isn't like a script in existence, because it is like you sit down in the office, Stan and whoever chats about this, passes it on, the artist draws it, and then you fill in the title. And it's like so. A script never really
But
existed.
I understand that for the 60s or 70s, but after modern age, I wonder if they still do it. I have seen before the plot strips.
Yeah.
I've seen it in again pre-internet age. I've seen it in like comic fan magazines and stuff, scripts printed. I want to see if I have any of those old magazines around. I'll take a look in them and see.
We'll do a follow-up on this one.
Yeah, and I do remember the plot version, and but it's interesting. Comic writing is interesting because, the funny thing is, growing up, pre-internet age and everything, you read all these books, you read all these artist interviews and stuff, and you had a strict formula on how to do things. Marvel or DC method.
Yeah.
And those are the only two methods, and they were strict guidelines. But as years went by and you start reading more interviews with artists and writers and stuff, you realize, well, that's not really true, because every person does it differently.
Yeah, and this is proof.
And I remember the whole thing with Jack Kirby. I remember even they were talking to Jack, reading an interview of him. Now, again, if I'm wrong, please correct me on this, but he just goes to the page and starts drawing.
Yeah.
There's no writing involved. And his writing was mostly on the side panel, side borders and stuff like that. But he didn't even, as far as I know, he didn't write out a plot. He just started drawing.
Yeah, that's what I hear too. So it's interesting. That's why him and Stan Lee worked well together, because I think Stan would just be like, "You're going to do this," and then he would be like, "Awesome,
yeah,
like, that's what I want to do is just go and draw," and then so I think it worked in his favor. So it's interesting.
Now, anyone who's watching here, please let us know how you write your script and how you how you come up with your ideas on your stories, because I'm curious on how people do it.
So I mean, we've taken a look at other people's scripts and things like that, and talked about like Marvel method. I think there's a lot more to talk about this too, don't you?
I think so because, again, like I said, it'd be interesting to see. Forget about Marvel method, forget about DC method. I want to see what people like us do.
Yeah.
The independent indie small guys, how they create their books.
Yeah. So I guess I could ask you. We could definitely talk about how we write our scripts, and I think we'll do a future episode where we'll actually break down our scripts, or lack thereof scripts, but even like your notes. But I think, I guess the one question is, like, did you have any influence when it came to, like, when you did your first TikTok Tom story? Were you like, oh, this is how this person does it, so this is how I'll do it? Or did you just sort of go, I don't know how to do it, but I'll just make something?
No, I was one of those kids that, as a teenager, I found many magazines and articles and things like that I could on, for example, I'll give you an example on one to sidestep away from scripting. Comic Scene magazine years ago did an interview with, this is in the mid 80s, did an interview of inkers. Mm-hmm. And it was a span of like 4 or 5 issues. And it had Klaus Janson, Dennis Cowan, and a couple of other, Joe Rubenstein, and other inkers talking about how they ink and their methods and everything. So I bought every issue to read it, to see how these creators ink.
Yeah.
They mentioned the tools they used, everything. Now, unfortunately, at that time, writing, there wasn't much around for writing, but some of those magazines did print samples of scripts.
Okay.
And so then, going through it, I knew I knew what the Marvel method was. I knew what the DC method was because I read enough on it to find that out. Now, one of the key books that I looked at and I bought it and studied it inside out was the Marvel Tryout book when it came out, mm-hmm. because it showed a sample of a script, or a plot. Then it showed how a writer plots out, puts a script, puts the word balloons and placements or word balloons and things like that. So that was one of the books that I bought and studied, mm-hmm. really.
And that.
What about you?
So I mean, I as anybody who's heard this podcast before knows, I started with animation and then got more. I was into comic books, but for a living and for a career and for professional and all that, I started in animation. So I learned when I was in animation, I started in the drawing and creative side and even production side. But then when I wanted to get into stories, so I got into script writing, like film script writing. So I read a few books on film script writing, just to get an idea of how it's done and the formats and all that. And so I would study that quite a bit. And then when I got into doing comic books, I started writing my scripts like films. And then I only to realize that that's pretty much not too far off from how a lot of people write comic books. Is they write them like,
That's an interesting point because I have seen some writers write as a film script.
yeah. And the only difference is, I mean, you're not describing a moving panel, so things like you can't say car moves from left to right or something like that. And so you're more describing like just the visual parts of a panel, and then you have to break it apart. So you have to break it apart into panels, because a movie script is just panel after panel after panel, really, and there's no adjustment of size of panels or this panel's next to this panel or anything like that. It's just because you have the screen and that's it. So everything that you describe has to be on the screen. But then pages, you wouldn't think about pages when you're writing a film script because there's no pages. It's just continues on. There's acts, like you can go act 1, act 2, and act 3, but you don't really have to. If you're writing a good script, that'll sort of naturally appear. You don't have to actually mark this is act 1 and mark this is act 2, or after you finish, you might do it.
So here's a question: When did you realize this is how it's done? Like writing a story
for movies or for comics?
Either.
So movies, I mean, the idea of a movie script has been around forever. Like I sort of knew that forever, that these existed, because even like when I was a tiny little kid, the idea of like people collecting movie scripts was a thing. So I knew that
even bookstores had books on movie scripts,
and they would even publish like movie scripts.
Yeah.
Like you could buy like the Star Wars scripts,
yeah.
just buy a copy of it. So for comic books, I actually sort of always thought it was more drawing and less scripting. So it's sort of your style was always sort of how I thought it was done, and only later did I learn that there's some people who like really script out like a movie script, and then that was pretty much by the time I was sort of thinking about writing comic books and things like that, and I sort of looked into it and was like, oh, okay, there's a lot of methods. Alan Moore has sort of been legendary, so I think even when I was into animation, I mean, I liked Alan Moore's stuff even then. And so I knew that you'd hear stories or read the back of his books and be like, oh yeah, this guy does it different than everyone. So
everyone.
Yeah. So
now here's one thing I've noticed over the years working with various, for the TikTok Tom books, various writers and various artists. I've had artists come up to me saying, "Hey, can you do me write a story for me?" And sometimes I write it in a plot form, or sometimes I'll write it in a sketch form. And I have done it where I've done a full detailed scripts. Now, I worked with one or two writers where I do their stories, and they were different also, because one of them wrote a full detailed DC type of a script, and then the other guy would be like more, in mesh between Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
So everyone has a different technique.
Now the question because I've had this, because when somebody asks me to write a script, what I tend to do, and my way, like when you ask me for a script, what I tend to do is I give you every step along the way. So I'll say, this is my rough outline. This is what I'm thinking of for the story. What do you think? Just to get feedback. Then sometimes you'll give me feedback and I'll extend it. And then I'll be like, well, this is sort of more detailed, but maybe not a finished script. I'll give it to you. And then sometimes you'll give me feedback, or sometimes you'll say, nope, this is good. And that'll be the end of it. Because you're like, this is so that's my method as far as when I'm doing written stuff is I keep the artist in tap, like I contact them as I'm writing it, send them each level, and once they're at a point reading it going, I understand what you want to do here, we can stop, you don't have to write anymore, I understand what you're trying to do. I would continue, like if you actually if you said, like I don't know, I can't remember the last time I wrote something, but like if you ever tell me, you're like, oh, okay, this is good, like maybe a bit more detail, I'd be like, okay, like I would just keep going until you said.
Well, mentioning that, the story Chris has done for our TikTok Tom Maneater book, Massimo's drawing it, and the script you sent, the story you sent, honestly, I thought, Massimo did an amazing job. He sent me the story for it. And I thought Massimo would ask for more detail for the story.
Yeah, and I really leave it up to like the person working on it, whether it's the editor or the artist working on my stuff like that, I sort of send them a script and I send them everything along from like my paragraph to where I'm just sort of figuring out the idea. And I will go all the way down to, I will sit there and spend a page describing a raindrop if they want.
Do you find it, and I found it myself, and being an artist, I've drawn other people's scripts for stories and stuff like that, and sometimes I'll read the script and I go, what did you have in mind on this? Because I can't, here it's not coming up,
Yeah.
like what you're thinking, and, me being creative, it's just like, that should be easy, but it's not.
Yeah, it's true. You do get those moments, and that's why I think it's like a back and forth to some degree. Because like there might be something, and I don't want to assume, like when I'm writing something that like I'm okay. Like if Massimo messaged me and was like, I've got your script, I don't understand what you want to do in this part. Like maybe he's got everything else completely clear, but he just doesn't understand this one part. I'll be like, yeah, I'll give you more detail on that of what I had in mind. But I tend to find,
And just look here, and we'll put a sample up.
there we go. So
Yeah.
I tend to find that it's like, I tend to like the amount of detail and the type of detail really depends on the person I'm working with. And, like if I was to do a Blue Orchid story, I imagine I would give more detail just because I know the character and I have something specific in mind. But if I was to do like a TikTok Tom story with somebody who's drawn like a dozen TikTok Tom stories, I don't have to because they have something in mind
But here's
already.
the thing. The script you wrote for Massimo, you've never worked with Massimo before.
Yeah.
So, I thought the script was, if I was drawing it, I would be asking you 100 questions.
Yeah. And that's fine. And I'd be okay with that. Like I'd be totally fine with that.
But Massimo didn't ask any questions, which is great.
Yep.
That's a difference between two artists, between myself and Massimo, where, and here's the funny part. If I'm writing a story for myself, very little detail.
Yeah.
But if I'm drawing a story, I want detail.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say about like when I give extreme detail for a story sometimes, I find that if the artist changes it, I get a little, like I'm not mad, but I sort of go,
That's another thing,
like,
yes.
I wouldn't have, I don't know if I would have done that way. Like, and often it works out, but I've had a few stories where I sort of looked at them, and it's not that I'm unhappy with them, but I'm sort of look at them and go, there was a point there I was trying to make that isn't there anymore. The story still works, but maybe there was a point I was trying to make that isn't there anymore, and I'll sort of think, okay, that's the direction they went. But again, it's not mad, but it's sort of like, okay, like I am sort of thrown off a rhythm. And if they ask me for more detail on that point, I'd be like, but you've eliminated it. I can't, it's gone. So,
That's an interesting point you bring up, because that's another thing. If I do remember reading interviews with writers, and a lot of times writers will bring that up, saying, like with the DC tight script, there's very little movement for the artist to change anything, but artists have changed things. But the plot one, Marvel plot style, the artist could interpret it completely differently, and the writer would say, yeah, like you just said, exactly the same thing. Well, I was thinking more in this direction, but you took it in this. Now, you had the good and bad, because you could really improve the story or just completely lose the point of the story.
I mean, I've yet to have a problem where I've sort of had somebody go like ruin it, and I'm like, well, this isn't a good story anymore. Like anytime I've ever had a big change in a story, I go, oh, okay, well, this is, maybe like this idea I had isn't what this artist had in mind, and so we went. But then I've never had a point where I've been like, oh, well, this is horrible. I don't want to read it. So I'm sort of like, okay, they went a different direction. Now I get to enjoy the story a little bit because it's a new thing to me too.
It's happened in TikTok Tom. I don't want to give names or anything like that, where I've gotten the scripts for stories, and then the artist drew it, and the artist, or we got the scripts, and the artist drew it, and completely different what the artist wrote. I mean, the writer wrote.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, this is not what, and you're shaking your head going, what did the artist read here?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, it's a difference of opinion on something. Like, I imagine that like say you were writing a DC comic thing and you were writing a Superman script and you had Superman like beating up some thug. And somebody might go, well, he isn't that violent. Like, I wouldn't do that. But maybe it's important to the story.
That's it.
And so they
Yeah.
have him not beat up the thug. And it's like, but the writer's like, but that's like, the point of the story is he has supposed to beat up the thug. It's about beating up a thug. That's the whole, and so I could see that happening. And I mean, I've had that happen too, but I have yet to have it happen where I don't go, okay, he decided not to beat up the thug. Went a different direction. It's a different story.
You mentioned a good point because I bought DC's Identity Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It's written by Brett Meltzer and drawn by, I hope I pronounce his name, Rags Morales.
Yep.
And Brad Meltzer in the back talks about his script he wrote and everything. And he said in one of the scenes he wrote, he wanted to see this version of a script, and he's talking about one of the scenes where he wanted to do a similar scene of that happened in Shawshank Redemption, where Tim Robbins' character escapes from prison and the rain's falling and all this. And he goes, he wrote a detailed description of how he wanted to interpret that scene, but the artists do it differently, and the artist goes, look at the page before you criticize it. Look at the page. And he goes, as a writer, he said, he had this idea and this is how he wanted it. But when the artist showed on the page, he goes, yes, it's way better than what he imagined.
Yeah, it happens. And that's the.
But again, opposite happens also. So, it's a hit and miss,
Yeah. But I tend to not grip onto my ideas so much and be like, this is my baby, and so it can't change. If it's my baby, I'm going to draw it myself.
But there's writers out there that are strict. Don't change anything.
Yeah, I'm not one of them.
No. I mean, professionally, I've heard some writers are really hard to work with. Some, So, but it's, again, I could see their point of view. You know what? This is my baby. I'm writing it. You just draw it.
That's the reason why nobody else is drawing Blue Orchid.
Yes, that's it.
I mean,
You're a diva.
Well, as far as that goes, yeah, I'm not. I have something very specific and where it's specifically going, and I don't want it messed with.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
That's maybe in a bit, maybe after the first 4 issues, if I decide to do more and I do little sub stories, I definitely would invite people to do it. But for now, it's like, particularly for the beginning bit I'm doing it, I was like, I want to set this up exactly right, so that way somebody doesn't take it a different direction.
Now, here's an example I'm going to give, and we talked about this a couple of times in our videos. The writer and Chris Claremont. I remember reading interviews with John Byrne, and John Byrne eventually got a co-plotter credits on X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think the writer-artist team really became a cohesive team and start thinking alike and throwing ideas back at each other, because John Byrne's a great writer,
yeah,
and Claremont's amazing also, and that's why X-Men, their run on X-Men was amazing.
Yeah,
and I guess before he just he's the writer, I'm the artist.
Yeah.
Then they start talking and saying, hey, let's do this, let's do that, and it worked out very well.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we should wrap this up. But I think we should say there's no right way to write a script. Even if you don't write a script, it's still the right way to write a script.
Yes, that's it.
So,
and please show us your samples. We'd love to see your samples.
We'd definitely love to see your samples. So, Chetan, why don't you wrap this up for us?
Well, thank you for joining us again on Geek Shop. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.